Welcome back to the show. Today on Business Mastery for Startups, Scale-Ups, and Early Stage Businesses, I'm fortunate to have Todd Sherin, and of course me, your host, Jerry Gadori, to talk about what happens for mid and late stage entrepreneurs, mid and late stage folks in their career when they want to explore entrepreneurship. Super exciting topic, and the best person to bring it to us is Todd Sherin. Todd, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm really happy to be here. This is a topic I'm really passionate about. It's grown over time. I'm 50, soon to be 51. I'm a three-time founder, all of which after the age of 40. Fortunate enough to have sold the first two. I'm on the third one now. It hasn't been easy. It's not the kind of exits that you're going to read about on the news. I'm not buying a Hawaiian island and setting up like a bomb shelter there, but they were good. And it's really doable. And as I see my peers struggling and looking for options, to me, this seems to be the way forward.
I thought the reason I had you on the show is you were buying me a Hawaiian island.
I mean, of course, they usually come in pairs, which is great. So that way I can be, close to one of my newest friends.
Well, I will say this. I don't know that I want to share bunkers with Zuckerberg. So maybe it's best that you didn't get the Hawaiian island.
That's probably true. No, it's a fascinating topic though, and as is Hawaiian ownership.
For sure.
Another day.
Yeah, another day we'll talk about how property laws can inspire billionaires to buy land.
Exactly.
And I'm just looking at you, Southern Florida.
Exactly.
So I'm a little older than you. I'm only a two-time founder.
Okay.
But like you, I started my entrepreneurial journey later in life.
Okay.
I've always been in paper for performance roles. So sales, recruiting, business development. Then later on, again, different forms of pay for performance roles, which I felt for me really primed my entrepreneurial journey. I was already accustomed to tying my outcomes to my paycheck.
Exactly.
So it really primed. But I've got to say it's interesting, and I totally get your thrust in targeting folks later in life. But there are many entrepreneurial careers where I feel like a little bit of gray in the beard goes a long way to your credibility and success.
Yeah.
Whereas if you were to look at social media or mainstream media, the inverse seems to be true.
Yeah.
We're focusing on the 20-year-olds, and more power to them. Entrepreneurs are the best. We're the engine that drives the global economy. But the interesting point is, in most circumstances, I found, again, folks a little bit more gray in their beard have more success in the area.
Yeah, I you're right. I think so. Obviously, maybe selfishly, I think there's room for everyone. We've grown up, especially sort of like Generation X, with people, say mid 40s plus, that have really sort of built a lot of this technology over time. We were used to seeing the 20-somethings that were starting the Facebooks of the world, right? When Zuckerberg was in college, among countless others, and smaller ones as well. But we've really encouraged sort of creativity at a young age, which we should continue to do so, because there's no question that a lot of these like fascinating businesses that are emerging tech are going to come oftentimes from youth, because they're going to think about solving problems differently. And that's a great thing. And we always need to have that. My point is there's room, however, for, to your point, some of the gray beards who are going to bring some wisdom. It's almost like a cliche, but true. We're going to bring some of that life experience and sort of put it to work for yourself. There's real value there. You find with a lot of the larger VC firms, they're going after younger founders for that creativity. But then one of the first things that they do as they're seeing success is they will pivot to some new sort of adults in the room, which will be some of those graybeards, to run specific parts of the business, if not the entire business in many cases. And there's a lot of wisdom behind it. There's a lot of purpose behind that. And in a smaller way, so many of our peers can do the same thing for themselves with a sort of smaller, simpler, not necessarily realistic, but something befitting that time in their life.
Yeah, and and I don't want to get too far derailed. Again, we can always do more of the show later. But a couple of weeks ago, we were fortunate to have the culture coach, Grace McCarrick, on, and we're talking a little bit about, this is the first time in history we've had 5 generations working together.
Yeah.
Interestingly as well, the whole future of work concept and the way that employees and employers are interacting is different. In our parents' and grandparents' age, you worked 1, maybe 2 jobs in your life.
Yeah.
And then in our earlier careers, you worked in a job for 5 to 10 years before you'd consider moving on.
Yeah.
Fast forward 10 years, and it was 3 to 5 years. Now for tech folks, it's typically about two. Every two
Yeah.
years, the
Hmm.
perm employees move. And,
Yeah.
and it's just the nature of business, and things have changed. And I think in that world, we're shifting to a point where a perm job really isn't perm.
Yeah.
They're all
Hmm.
just a length of engagement. And
Yep.
I think that really lends itself, especially for older folks, to a path of entrepreneurship.
Yeah, for sure. It's funny. So I do a lot of reading on this topic, obviously, and you oftentimes hear about how large companies are reluctant to hire an older worker, oftentimes because there's a lot of upskilling and investment required to get them where they need to be for that particular role. There's some truth to that. But where it runs a little thin for me is because of that 2 year turnover, you're not going to necessarily expect them to be there that long anyway. So provided they have the skills to satisfy the requirements of the job today, and then somewhat tomorrow, that should be sufficient. So I think you're right. There's a lot of this moving around almost like a shell game. And overall, in many ways, the employee wins as a result. They really do because they're getting new skills from new industries, from new companies, new experiences, new people, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And all that's super valuable. And then the flip side of that, well, seemingly the company, potentially loses out a little bit. They also get the benefit of new blood all the time that come with sort of like, it's sort of like that honeymoon effect, right? You're doing your best job as a spouse, those first whatever period of time, right? And then there's tends to be the cliche, there's a lull. Similar, right, with employees. They come in and they're ready to go. And then by the time they're, maybe ready to start waning off a little bit, they're moving on anyway. So that benefits the company. So there's positive and negatives to everything, but there's a lot of positives to some of the shuffling around.
Yeah, I will not disagree, but I will push you a little deeper into what you said. There can be benefit for both
Yeah,
if it's
fair enough.
structured properly. The
Properly.
companies that I'm seeing thriving, they're acknowledging the reality of the marketplace, and they're
Mhm. Yeah.
establishing a type of relationship with their teams of more of a long-term partner than an
Mhm.
employee employer.
Yeah.
And that difference, number one, for people who stay, they tend to be more engaged, fulfilled, and they grow. And as
Yep.
long as those three things, I call it the EFG leadership framework, are in place, people are incentivized to stay. So they do.
Yep.
When one of those
Yes.
things breaks, they leave. But
Right.
companies that look at it the right way, to your point, they structure that so that people can leave painlessly. If you didn't do anything wrong, like
Yep.
assuming you're not, embezzling funds or something awful,
Right.
if you leave because you've got a better opportunity, that's not your failing. That's mine. I didn't provide it to
Agreed.
you. So
Agreed.
you leaving is
Yeah.
is a solid thing. But again, what I'd really like to talk about, because it's your background specifically, is entrepreneurship for people mid late stage. What advice do you give them? How do they set off on that path?
It's interesting. It's so diverse. I think the sort of the benefit of, to your point, sort of the gray beard, gray hair, right? So it's not sort of gender specific. Um, the benefit there is having this breadth of experience, oftentimes professional, but also personal. And the as the individual thinks through what it is they want to do, that exercise is critical. And so I obviously went through my own specific exercise for this latest time around. And for me, I read the sort of positives and negatives of everything that I've done thus far. Thus far in my career, I've been a technologist. The two companies I founded previously, one was a technology services company, one was a software company. So technology heavy, to some degree, emerging technology, specific kinds of analytics and automation. And as I was deciding what I wanted to do next, did I want to leverage that experience? That I want to add something else and modify it a little bit? And I landed on something that was appropriate for me at this stage in my life. And I think that's really important for everyone to do. Is really evaluating what they do well, where it's sort of their circle of competence, so to speak, sort of that mental model of understanding what it is we do well and understand sort of the borders around that. So you're going to take something that you do well, something that you identify with, something that you're passionate about, something that you're going to carry that forward into the sort of these later years, or maybe not necessarily later years, but mid to late years as you're working. That part's really critical because if you don't get behind it with everything, it's not going to go well. And if you don't get behind your own business with everything, it's not going to do anything. And so
Yeah, it's
that's
critical.
right? That's really critical. There's, statistics out there that most of us know, 50% of businesses fail within the first 5 years. So you can absorb that when you're younger, but if you're doing that in later stages, it could be backbreaking for retirement. The point of this is to be solvent. The point of this is to sort of be able to enjoy these 50 plus years, right? And those later years, because we're living longer and living better, we need to do that with something that we're really passionate about so that we really do it. Because when comes down to entrepreneurship, it's all on us individually. That part's really important. There's a variety of ways to do that. I write about it in my newsletter. There's plenty of places you can go to the MIT Age Lab to learn more about those sorts of things. There's plenty of resources out there, and I'm happy to talk to anybody about it at any time. And maybe we'll dig into it a little bit more in a future episode. But finding that specific thing that you're passionate about is first and foremost. And then the monetization of that is sort of not secondary, but is the second step. It's far easier
one
to think
A
through that.
and one B.
Exactly right. Exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah, and let's talk about your newsletter later, but I think and this isn't a perfect analogy, and I acknowledge that.
Yeah.
But setting up your company as an entrepreneur is not dissimilar to just sitting a sales desk for the first time. When I trained people back in my days as a sales trainer, when I would train, and I know I'm not supposed to say this, I'm going to say it anyway. When I train a younger person, I would encourage them to lean into the strengths of youth. So when they're talking to a prospect, don't lean on that. I've been there, I've done that, I'm experienced, because it won't sell. Lean on that. I'm going to work 2 times harder, and I'm an underdog, and you're never going to meet anybody who works as hard as I am. For older folks who are just starting on a sales desk, it was the inverse. I would tell them, look, lean on the fact that you have experience, lean on the fact that you've been there and done that, lean on the fact that you don't have to work as hard as that young person to get the same outcome. And I would encourage entrepreneurs who are looking, to start their first venture later in life to look at it the same way. I look at most of the folks who again, my consulting company helps small businesses to be able to consistently attract, recruit, and retain top talent. We help them to develop the skills to do that consistently. So I work with hundreds of companies. So that's where I'm drawing this from. When I'm talking to older entrepreneurs, it's almost, especially multi-exit founders like yourself, it's almost always the same thing. When they get the idea, they bring the old band back together. They dig into their professional network. You see a lot of familiar faces, and then they rock and roll from there. And who are their first customers? Customers they had 7 years ago. You know what I mean?
Correct.
That professional network that a mid to late career person has can be absolutely worth 10 times its weight in gold.
No question about it. It allows you to build momentum and velocity, which otherwise you need to create anew. And in my case, as an example, when I get the band back together, it's always the same people. And to your point, I have the same maybe 6 customers, pretty big banks, and then some smaller companies as well, mid-size, I guess, always call on. And, it comes down to your point, 10 years ago, 7 years ago, 5 years ago, they were a customer. They've come company to company. Now, some of them with me, the third company, and they will continue to do so. They're friends, and it allows you to scale much faster. It allows you to build something faster and feel comfortable, because when you're comfortable, you're going to do everything better. So you're right. That part's really important. The point you made about the sort of building the sales desk and talking to a younger salesperson or an older salesperson is spot on. Like, it could not be more spot on. The idea of lean into your strengths and do it with authenticity is so important, because I think we've all seen that I was probably that younger person that tried to pretend that I had all of this experience when it just is silly, right? Maybe you felt like you did when you were in your 20s, and for a 20-year-old, perhaps you do, but you then go and sell to, say, you and me at this stage of our career, and it comes off as silly. However, if you come off as the hardest working, who won't stop, you can respect that person all day, right? That's a great thing to be. And so that part's really important. It's interesting. One of the first people I spoke to as I started sort of this, late stage career journey was a woman who was in the recruiting space, and she was more in customer service, and we were moving her over to sales. And we spent a lot of time talking about what are your strengths she's in her 50s, and what were her strengths? What is she good at? Where is she uncomfortable? And we tailored everything around that. And that's really exactly what you were describing. It's really important because it comes off as more authentic. It's leveraging all the things that she had done in the past and sets her up to be successful in the future. Not to say we're not going to try some other things because, old dog can learn new tricks. No question. I do all the time. But starting out with some of the older tricks so that the person's comfortable allows them to try some of the new ones. So you're 100% right about that.
Yeah, so it's interesting. The comfort zone gets a bad rap. Every single one of us who's made it out of high school has seen the comfort zone, and then the outside your comfort zone is where all the growth is. And there's truth in that, for sure.
There is.
There's two parts of the comfort zone that are really necessary. The first is if you start from there and expand out, you expand out with confidence, to your point with that customer service person. The second part is life in the outside your comfort zone sucks. It's the outside your comfort zone. So occasionally retreating to rebuild and kind of catch your breath and then jumping back out is a win. And you said something else that's really important too, and that's the authenticity piece. Human beings are incredible authenticity filters. Very often we can't describe what about a person makes us feel iggy, but something does.
And that's does. You feel that on your neck.
Yeah, it's like an uncanny valley thing almost.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. No, go ahead.
No, it's just we're both sort of like nodding, going, yeah. No, because you're right. It's you feel it and you know it, and even to your point, even if you cannot pinpoint it, it's there. And in a business environment, in any environment, if there's an immediate reaction where you sort of pull apart, right? Because if you feel that, you don't want this, you don't want to be right next to each other in any capacity. So then once you start having that separation, you sort of already lost that relationship. If it's personal, it's a friendship that's not going to last. If it's business relationship, well, you're certainly not going to get that contract or that customer or that client. And that's a meaningful, tangible loss.
Every long-term business relationship in the history of business relationships is built on trust and success. If both those things aren't there, there's not a reason to have it. But you bring up another important thing. So, and this is Don Bach said earlier, and it has to do with authenticity, but not quite. So many, many years ago, I worked for a recruiting company, and I was responsible for business solution sales. And that recruiting company had, to this day, worked with hundreds of recruiting companies as a consultant, been doing this 25 years. To this day, still the best recruiting team I've ever worked with. These guys are rock stars. The way that they broke out their recruiting team is they had pods that were dedicated to a specific technology. So it empowered the salesperson to be a generalist. And whenever they needed deep knowledge, they went to the recruiter, got that depth, and they could bring it back. It was amazing. The company at the time was, we were about 25, 30 million. So for a recruiting company, decent size, but not giant. But here's the thing. We would often compete against the big dogs and we'd crush them because our recruiting was amazing. But you couldn't go into a company and say, we have the best recruiters, even though objectively it was the truth. But you couldn't say that because everybody said it. So it had no value.
Zero.
So it's interesting, again, that authenticity and making sure that the message you're sharing resonates. And I circle this back to mid to senior level people, because again, what you bring is that not just life experience, but the direct business experience.
Yeah, 100%. So I give an example. So for the more recently with technology consulting, as I was sort of ramping into this world now of late stage career working and advising and all of that and helping people start businesses, as I was exploring where I wanted to go, I called on one of my old customers, and a company that passed on there was a large software vendor in the process mining, task mining space, sort of complex analytics on the border of automation world and software. And they were vetting out my company, decided to pass on it, didn't want to purchase it, which was sort of they talk about a gut punch. That was like, that was to me at the time, it would have been amazing. Didn't happen. We stayed friendly. I'm talking to that old customer of mine, the bank, and we were discussing, how, potentially I could help them. And to your point about the older worker, they were struggling with deploying this kind of analytics, this task mining software. And the company that they were working with was sort of one of the bigger process mining companies in the world. And in my world, task mining and process mining, while related, are very, very, very different. And the devils are in the details. Sort of the nuance of the differences between the two, in my experience, made that like abundantly clear to them, right? And so being able to go in as an individual, sort of the subject matter expert, was a way for me to go work with one of the world's biggest banks and one of the world's biggest software companies that otherwise there is no way that would have happened. And it all came down to sort of the idea of that experience, that pedigree built over time, authenticity, to your point. And that's the kind of exercise that everyone can go through. It doesn't have to be related to technology. It doesn't have to include a bank. It doesn't have to include a software company. It could be we talked about this before we started recording. It could be a woman in higher ed who wants to start a yoga practice and sell to companies because they were the kinds of companies that she partnered with at the university. Where there's all these like inroads that we find over time that until we really sit down and think about how those inroads map out, I think about it oftentimes like a highway. And so you have those like off ramps and on ramps. Until you really map that out, it's difficult to see what that looks like. And that exercise is enormously helpful. And as you work over time, if you work in a way, to your point, where there's like authenticity built up and a level of success and a level of trust, you're going to have that map. It's just a matter of figuring out what it looks like. So then you can identify those on ramps and off ramps so that you can capitalize on it. It really is. It's sort of understanding that so you can then figure out your next path forward. In my view.
100% yes. And the thing about the professional network that we can't move past is this. Sales has changed fundamentally in the 25 years I've been doing this. When I first started out, really going to put the gray in my beard when I say this, the internet was the new kid in the block. Email was the killer app. My first manager felt like email was a waste of time and a diversion, and would make us turn off our monitors during call blocks and just keep all paper notes. So dating myself by intention here. But my point in mentioning it was finding people's contact info was very difficult to do. But once you did it, getting in touch with them was pretty easy. My manager in those days expected us to make between 100 and 125 dials a day. And we would get 20 to 25 people live on the phone. And of those 20 to 25, a solid 7 to 10 would have meaningful conversations. To anybody actively selling now, that represents a good month.
That's an enormous month. That's an enormous month.
That was a day for us. So were our cold calls garbage by modern standards? Absolutely. They were garbage. But when you were going to have 50 meaningful conversations in a week, it didn't matter. You know what I mean?
It made no difference. They also didn't know any better.
Yeah, the reason I mention it is now it's literally the exact opposite problem. Getting somebody's contact info is ridiculously easy. There are a million tools to do that, many of them free. Getting them to engage in any meaningful way, that's the hard part. So as a mid or late age career, a career person, having that professional network, that friends and family group that you can initially reach out to, because we all know the first 5 to 10 sales are always the hardest. So get that first group of sales and testimonials and referrals. It's a night and day difference. It's
no question,
completely different.
No question. Well, you refine your craft, and in many cases, for these sort of mid and late career people, that craft is going to be new, right? They're going to be sort of building it in a new way, and so that sales pitch is enormously scary for many and very, very different. So to your point, leveraging that with your network, friends and family and colleagues makes all the difference in the world. It also gives you a right to win because you've been through it. So you have a right to win to then call on somebody new, somebody cold, somebody lukewarm. At that point, you've done it. And even if it's somebody, in many cases, the part that like people don't talk about, somebody for me as an example, doing it to someone, I'd rather actually do it with somebody cold, right? Doing it to like a friend or a family, that's terrifying, right? It really is. Many people, they're thrilled to do it. It's a great way to go about it. I do it that way because I realize you sort of have to go against like what you're thinking, because that's the best way to do it. They'll give you the best feedback, and again, gives you that right to win. So going through that process makes all the difference in the world. And they're usually, if not always, happy to sit through it. And in many cases, they're going to buy because they're with you for a reason, whether it's a friend or a family. There's something like-minded, and they're going to be a customer, which is great. Everybody wins.
Yeah, and you said it apart, not as important as a sale, but not too far behind. Is they're going to listen with credulity, but they're going to suspend their disbelief, and they're going to give you good feedback.
Yes, they will.
And that's huge. You know, when you're cold calling somebody, you're not going to get great feedback usually. I mean, it's possible theoretically, but it's certainly
Sometimes.
a
Yeah.
statistical anomaly when it
Yeah.
happens. But
Yeah.
somebody who knows you well will care enough to say, "Hey, Todd, I think I know where you're going, but I don't get your value proposition, or
Right.
your way
Right.
the way you're billing for this is outside
Right.
what I'm used to, or whatever it is."
Yeah. Yeah. No, you're right. And that feedback is typically, in my experience anyway, changes everything. I mean, it reshapes everything from the beginning. My first inclinations, oftentimes, they are part of where you want to get to, typically a small part, right? It's that feedback that refines it further, just like you hear about like with your business, right? It's always that customer feedback and that customer interaction is going to tell me what I should be selling, how I should be selling it. To your point, how I should be billing for it, right? Am I billing too much? Am I billing too little? Should I break it out differently? Do I, pay to play? However, you're going to charge. All of that comes out from conversations with customers and prospects every time.
You
Every
know,
time.
and as both an author and a business owner, I will say I'm guilty of what I'm about to say. But what happens often, very often too, with founders is they invest too much energy in their initial product or service before
Mm-hmm.
sharing it with the market. In their head, they're like, "This is the best thing ever."
Yep.
And they get it out there and they've invested too much time, too many resources, and they start to get feedback. And instead of taking it with an open heart and being thankful for it, they feel very defensive. I know where
Yes,
everybody's
they do.
speaking because I've been here. I'm embarrassed to
So
say
have I.
more than,
Yeah, so have I.
you know, and
Yeah.
you feel like they're calling your baby ugly when they're really helping you to.
Exactly. Exactly went through my head. The same expression. It's so common, and you nailed it. To your point, if you don't obsess over it and overthink it, you're less inclined to love every little feature and facet of it. And that's the part that I'm still surprised at how often they make the mistake. And I certainly did it in the past also. So maybe I've just sort of, I forced myself to move beyond it. But it can be really hard. I'm always surprised with like customers when we're reviewing something. It could be something as silly as like language for marketing. And we're reviewing it. And I'm like, I think you should probably push that out. People should see it, right? We need to test it. I'm like, no, 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 it's not ready. I'm like, the notion of perfection is misguided, right? It's never going to happen. And then to your point, your idea of perfection is not going to necessarily be the idea of perfection for anyone else. And so you're never going to get there. If it's 60%, 70% of the way there, push it out, get some feedback, refine it. It's going to be way better after you get
Yeah,
some
make
feedback
sure
anyway.
you're even on the right track. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
when
Yeah.
I first released my recruitment retention as a service model, first of all, it was just recruitment as a service. It wasn't recruitment
Oh,
and
that's
retention.
interesting.
Yeah,
Okay. That's
the
interesting.
second part of it was I did it while the tech market fell apart. My professional network is in
Hmm.
tech and cybersecurity. That's my background.
Yeah.
So I was pitching recruitment as a service in a world where they were all getting laid off, which you might
Right.
imagine didn't go great. So, shocking nobody, selling drowning people water, not the best
Yeah.
model.
Exactly.
So it took a lot of iterations to develop that into the program
Yeah.
that it is today.
Interesting.
Um, and it's ironic. I was a management consultant, sales trainer, recruiter trainer, and
Yeah.
in my own business, I made about every mistake you can make that other people paid me to make sure they didn't make. And what I've come to believe is that, and maybe I'm shepherding my ego when I say this, but what I've come to believe is it's a matter of being too close to the problem. You
I
you
think you're right.
you know, when the problem's right up on your nose. I mean, that's why there's marriage counselors. I would assume
Yeah.
marriage counselors use marriage counselors because when
Probably.
you're in the problem, you can't see it. And
I see.
I'll tell you, it's so easy to get overly invested in your
Hmm.
product or service,
Yeah.
and then, like I
Yeah.
said, the feedback feels like an attack, not an help.
No question. Same thing to your point about like in sales, right? That's why oftentimes those layers of management are important. I've been through I don't know how many like sales strategy meetings over the years, and the account exec, whatever you call the individual salesperson, they're talking about this big deal. They have a whale of a deal, and the thing just dragged week to week, month to month, sometimes year over year for the large enterprise stuff. And everybody could see this was not going to happen. never going to happen. But the salesperson who is so invested, who has the relationships, and sounded like oftentimes not as good as he thought or she thought, they don't see it. And you need outside eyes, provided that they're going to be objective and helpful and all those things. But assuming that's the case, you need that outside perspective to help shape it, right? Sometimes the best thing to do is to move on. Same thing happens with business, right? So it's that part's super, super critical.
Yeah, yes is best, no is second best, maybe is the worst. It's the worst. Maybe more often than not is just misspelled no.
Exactly right. Exactly right. It maybe is like a muttering, right? That maybe sounds like a no, but it's definitely not a yes.
Yeah. And I totally, having been that salesperson, I completely understand. You're looking at that amount you have to hit every quarter, and you're like, well, maybe it takes a space in that funnel.
Exactly right. Right. There's a narrow chance where we can squeak that thing through, and I'm the guy that's going to do it. No.
Exactly.
It's not going to happen.
And the worst thing that can happen to you is it does happen. And now every maybe is a yes.
Every time. And there's the idea, and that's a really good point, because what happens oftentimes is those layers of management, which are built in place to be helpful, when that one person gets that crazy maybe, the expectation is that they're going to get that crazy maybe, and then all of a sudden those maybe sales that should be out of the forecast, they stay for that particular person, which doesn't serve anyone any good. And if anything, it's actually negative in so many other unforeseen ways, where it's like it's a morale killer for the rest of the team. It's inflating numbers for the individual contributor who now thinks that they can move mountains. And it never works. To your point, that's the worst thing that can happen.
Yeah, sometimes
it's great in the near term.
Yeah, sometimes my old partner and I had a saying that nothing fails like success. And that's an example of that.
Yeah.
But circling back to our primary topic, because clearly you and I could talk all day. When we're talking about, again, mid to late stage people, we talked about professional network, we talked about experience.
Yep.
What other tips could you give folks in that space?
So I think those two, I like how you're sort of like, you're working on like a three-legged stool, right? And so we have two legs. I think the third leg is a little bit, in my view anyway, is a little bit different. It's skilling. We touched on that briefly, but the idea of skilling for today and beyond is really critical. There's the perception that mid-level and mid-career rather and late career workers aren't necessarily skilled for today and tomorrow. I think in many cases that's not accurate. A lot of times what we hear about issues with skilling, they're related around typically like a lot of the conversational Gen AI kind of stuff, even sometimes things around like low code, no code systems for personal productivity and automation for the individual. All those things, it can all be taught. They're not terribly complicated, and particularly for people in our age bracket where we really did grow up with a lot of this technology. I mean, the story referencing where like you had to turn off your screen so you couldn't get to email or use like an early version of Word, right, on your PC at the time. I think Word perfect, right? That's one like outside of our age bracket. People don't know that. The point of that though is we have a lot of longevity with technology. We really did, at least from the professional perspective, we grew up in a world where we grew up with it. And so most of us are pretty savvy. There's going to be people that can be way more savvy. There's no question, but we have a good grounding and a good, sort of back to one of the original points, a good comfort level with sort of a baseline of technology. And to me, that tells me personally that many of us can be upskilled to learn some of these newer technologies. Now, my parents, as an example, right? My father's 90, my mother's 10 years younger, she's 80. They probably both a year off from that, but that's okay. We can round. They couldn't, right? They couldn't, and that's okay, right? And that's fine. But I think for our bracket, sort of 45 into their 70s, absolutely can. My wife's parents are much younger than mine. And my father-in-law is an example. He uses technology every single day. I mean, it impresses me every day with what he's able to do. And he's not unique in that way. So I think the upskilling part and to embrace that and not be afraid of that, and you can do that kind of training in a safe way from the comfort of your home is really important. Well, number one, if you're looking to maybe, let's just say you're not looking to start a business and you're looking to go work somewhere, that's going to be helpful in terms of doing that job and getting that job. Certainly help in the interview process. If you're going to be using it to start a business and using that sort of technology, it can make you more productive and do a lot more faster. So you can keep a business simple and small and not hire a bunch of people. I'm amazed every day at how much I can churn out with some of these newer tools, and I'm not unique in that way. Millions of people are using them all the time. So I think the upskilling and getting comfortable with some of this technology that's changing sometimes by the second is really important. It's going to make everyone's life simpler and they can just do more with less.
100%. And I want to use something you said to wrap our talk up for today. Not to end on a negative note, but a cautionary one.
Sure.
So, fair or unfair, frankly, usually unfair, stereotypes exist in the marketplace.
Yeah.
One of the things that I caution businesses, and I'm going to talk about this at a personal level in a second, but what I caution businesses on is to not accidentally reinforce negative stereotypes about your business. Yeah. So, for example, in the staffing realm, there's a reputation for, frankly, less than great ethics sometimes. There's a reputation for ghosting, for a mercenary attitude. So when I'm coaching an owner about their business, I make sure they understand, all those negatives and make sure nothing they do reinforces any of them. Because if anything they do reinforces any of them, very often the person who's, has those stereotypes in their mind, then that company becomes guilty of all of them.
Yep.
So where I take this to the personal level is the negative perception of older workers, and you hit it on a couple times, Todd, is their skills are dated. Sometimes it can be difficult to work with because they've been there, they've done that. And you've got to be really mindful. Not that you're trying to correct the world's perception for your demographic, that type of that's a fast path to a painful end. but
yes,
as it relates to your entrepreneurial journey, be mindful, lead with the positives. And I'll give you a probably superfluous example. If your primary marketing platform is LinkedIn, like I think both of ours is, mine certainly is, if you're concerned about that ageism stereotype and about that perspective of being underskilled, doing things like posting your Gen I certificates that you just got, things like listing out those skills, those types of things, they kill that stereotype before it can touch you. And that can be huge as a mid to late age, person.
I think you're right. And one of the first things that you had, when we first spoke a couple of weeks ago now, a few weeks ago now, the first thing you said was sort of highlighting the positivity. And I completely, it resonated with me very, very clearly. And it's funny, at the time, as I was talking to people about this, communicating, writing, but however I was speaking with people, I was always sort of leaning on the positive side. But after talking to you, honestly, I realized that some of it did have that ageism negative connotation to it. And there's reason for that, to your point, but there's a way to do it, right? Similar to how you're talking about how I'm going to write and post about my skill set. You can do that in a positive way by positioning what we do well versus what we don't like about what doesn't go so great. There's a way to do that. And you're 100% right. And it's funny, that's really stuck with me and modified some of the way in which I talk to people. And I think that it's not said often nearly enough. And to your point, that people are out, starting a new business or looking for a position, whatever it is, leading with positivity and leading with it's sort of a growth mindset, leading with the handshake mindset makes all the difference in the world, because it does diffuse that idea of difficult to work with. It does diffuse the idea of maybe you do have a ton of wisdom because you've built up all this experience, but you're not going to come off like someone who says, I have all this wisdom and all this experience. You're going to come off as someone who's going to say, yeah, let's have a chat about what we can do here and still be able to learn. And that makes an enormous difference. I agree with you. 100%.
Yeah, both social media and the mainstream media are storm clouds. It's always the bad news. It's always the negative.
Yeah.
But when you follow those few voices that have a positive view, it's like rays of sunshine breaking through the clouds. But I'm not gonna take your bait, Todd. We're not restarting the conversation. We're wrapping up here. So,
Fair enough.
where can folks reach you if they want to learn more about you and what you're doing out there?
So keep it really simple. To your point, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, so it's an easy way for people to come find me. I know they find you there quite a bit as well. Todd Sherin. I think all the information is going to be available as well. I also have a newsletter that I call the Map Is Not Me. It's just mapisnot.me. And there'll be links available for all that stuff. Those are the two easiest ways. And then from both of those platforms, this is the salesperson in me. I try to always make it really simple to get a hold of me. So there's a calendar link from LinkedIn or on that website to get a hold of me. And I'm honestly happy to talk to anyone all the time. I have several of these conversations every day. Find them personally rewarding, and then hopefully it's helpful for you as well. So reach out anytime. Happy to talk.
Awesome. And to Todd's point, all of those things will be in the show notes. So if you're watching this on YouTube, just go to the show description. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, just go to your show notes and you'll see the stuff there. Sometimes the links work. Sometimes you have to copy them and put them in your browser. But either way, they'll be there. So let's wrap up now. Todd, thank you very much again for being on the show.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And for all you fine listeners, as always, we greatly appreciate you tuning in. Between now and next week, go, do, be, and build something awesome. Bye.
Thanks so much.